Alright guys, welcome to the regular week 2 Twitch Lotto recap. We're going to go over 8 games. First game we're going to go over is a game between Onibushu and get a piece of chance, depending on where you see him. Game is a French advance. Okay, knight f3, queen b6, bishop e2, cd4, cd4. Okay. So the most common moves here are actually either knight to h6 or knight ge7.
Check.
Bishop e4 was played though, knight c3. Okay. So here again, black should probably play knight ge7. The idea of either coming to f5 and hitting d4, but also just kind of getting ready to castle. He played f6, which is actually a bit premature. You usually don't want to play f6 until after you've gotten castled. And so now castle was played by white, which is good. And again, you could play knight e7 with the idea of knight g6 hitting this pawn, knight f5 hitting this pawn. But he took on c3, which was kind of unnecessary. I mean, there's nothing really attacking this bishop, so why go for this trade? So this is also kind of a mistake. bc3, okay, fe5. Okay, so you notice how like black's kind of opening up the center, even though his king is stuck in the middle for at least 2 more moves. So this is why he should have played knight e7 a couple moves ago, and this move. So the question is, how should white recapture? Should white recapture with the pawn or with the knight? So there's a couple of things that work. One is, when you're trying to attack, you in general don't want to trade pieces. But if you think about it, black's only piece he has developed other than his queen is this knight. So trading it off is actually not a bad thing, because this knight actually helps to support e7. And the reason why you'd want to take with the knight rather than the pawn is after knight takes, pawn takes. After knight e7, this move bishop a3 is very, very strong, because now castling is not possible. This knight on e7 hangs. So white has a very good position. 2 bishops. This bishop's going to park itself on d6. Eventually you can play c4 and rip open the position even more. This bishop is very bad. But it loses a little bit of efficacy when you have this knight on c6, because they defend each other, the knight on c6 and the knight on e7. So after the move that was played in the game, de5, now knight g7, now bishop a3, now black can castle, because the knights defend each other. So it's kind of a subtle point, but knight takes was better. Okay, so here another thing white could have played is maybe just queen c2 and bishop a3, because the bishop likes this diagonal. Because from a3 it can reach d6, and from d6 it can help support this pawn. So this was probably the correct diagonal for the bishop. But instead he chose bishop e3. Oops, bishop e3. Which, gains a tempo, but this bishop isn't really as effective on this diagonal as it is on this diagonal. Because again, on d6 it helps support this pawn, and it really doesn't look at much on e3. So be careful about kind of developing with tempi when you're actually not putting the piece on the square it wants to be, because then you're not really helping yourself at all. So queen c7 was played, c4 was very strong, just trying to open up the center. And so the question is, why can't black take here? And the answer is knight takes e5. So bishop f4 doesn't quite work, because knight takes f3 is check, and then this would hang. But what you can do is actually just sacrifice a pawn with c takes d5, knight takes f3,
check,
bishop takes f3, e takes d5, and rook c1. And this is actually almost completely winning for white. The problem is this file is open. So for example, after queen d7, bishop c5, castle, and rook e1. This bishop is dead, this rook is dead, and this knight is in trouble. Rook f7, queen e2, knight g6, and just rook cd1. And really, black has no moves. I mean, I'm threatening to take here, I'm threatening queen e8 check probably, I'm threatening all sorts of nastiness. So black can almost resign here, even though he's up a pawn. So he doesn't want to do that because he doesn't want to waste time winning a pawn when he needs to get castled. So he correctly castled. And here, maybe just rook c1. This rook, it's rarely a bad idea to have the rook on the same file as the queen. And we know that this exchange is going to happen sooner or later. So might as well kind of prepare for that and put the rook on the open file. He took on d5 first, which is, you know, also okay, but like I said, that the exchange was going to happen anyway, so no need to actually engage in it yourself. So he took with a pawn. Bishop c5 heading for d6, which was a good idea. Bishop g4, bishop d6, queen b7, rook b1, rook b5. Okay. So now it seems like black is starting to win a pawn, sort of, with take on f3 and take on e5. So the way to defend it is simply just to play rook to e1. The idea now is if bishop takes f3, bishop takes f3, my rook defends e1. And also the rook is better on e1 than it is on f1. It's kind of on a better file. So after rook e1, say like rook f8, knight d4, bishop e2, and now rook e2 to defend f2. Knight d4, queen d4, b6, and rook c1. And this is probably slightly better for white. This bishop is better than this knight. This is actually a passed pawn, so it's dangerous. This rook is coming to c7. If rook c8, you can always play rook e c2 and control the file for sure. So this is definitely an advantage to white. But instead, white played knight d4 right away, which kind of just equalizes. Because now basically everything that happens up until after this point is pretty much forced. So bishop takes e2. You can't take back with the queen, of course, because of knight takes d4, so you have to take with the knight. Knight takes e5. Bishop takes e7, so you have to win your pawn back. If you take on e5, you're just down a pawn. So he took on e7 to deflect the queen, so he could take on d5. Queen takes e7, queen takes d5 check. f7, knight g3. This is all kind of just fine. So now this position is pretty much just dead equal. It's 4 on 4. Black has this queenside pawn majority, but you can't really get it rolling because white's rooks are going to be slightly better. So, I mean, these next 15 moves or so, it's pretty much just equal the whole time. So, queen e4, knight c6, rook f1, take. Knight takes might have been slightly more accurate just to get this knight into the game, but rook takes was fine too. g6, f3, rook fd7, rook e2, king f7, so this is still just dead equal. Getting your king into the game was good. b6. Now this rook is free to move. Getting the knight into the game. Attacking the knight. Knight d4. Rook c4. e5. Rook c5. a6. Okay, so white's kind of threatening some things. Rook bc1. Double on the file. King e6. Rook c7. Offer a trade. Rook takes. a5. Rook a7. a4.
Check.
A6. King f7. Okay, so it's still pretty much equal. Rook b6 and rook d5. So actually white, I think, has made a little bit of progress in the past 15 moves. This rook is more active than this rook. This king is a little bit closer to the center because it can reach e3, whereas this king is cut off. So white has probably a slight advantage here, even though these pawns are kind of far advanced. You know, he can never really play b4 or a3. So black can't really make more progress. So here, probably what white should do is actually play rook b7 check. So the point is, actually, this king can't go to e6 like it wants to because of rook g7, king f5, g4,
check.
King f4, rook f7,
check.
King e5,
check.
e7, knight e6, and king e3. And notice that I'm actually threatening f4 mate. So if you play b4, this is actually mate.
Checkmate.
So that's kind of cute. So because you can't play king e6 after
check.
b7, you actually have to play king f8. And now you actually have cut the king off even further. So this was a useful move to throw in. And now you can do whatever you want. You can go like g4, h4, king e3, whatever. But kind of forcing the king to the back row was important. But okay, he played knight d6 check instead, which is okay, a reasonable move.
Check.
King g7. And now he probably should move something like, I don't know, maybe even back knight back to e4, try to get that position again. Because his pawn is well defended. But unfortunately he makes a blunder and loses a piece straight out. And the problem is he plays king to e3. And now the problem is this knight and this king are a knight fork away from each other. So rook takes d6 just wins a piece. Rook takes d6, and now knight f5.
Check.
So kind of a little two-move tactic, and the game is over. King d3, knight takes d6. This is just hopeless. So really kind of an unfortunate result to this game, because for 40 moves, white played very well. Better than black. Better than black, but one move unfortunately kind of cost them the game. So it's important that you don't hang pieces, because it can ruin what was otherwise a very well played game. So so it was unfortunate for Oni, but GPAC got a little bit lucky. Okay, so that was that game. Okay, let's go on to the next game, which is gonna be Zwish and Llama Lord. Okay, so this was, I think, for top spot in the ladder at that time. So d4, d5, c4, c6, knight c3, knight f6. Okay, so Zwish learned not to play bishop g5. He played e3, e6, knight f3, knight bd7. Okay, so here the more normal moves are bishop d3 or queen c2. Whoops, that's not queen c2. Queen c2. Okay, he took on d5 instead. It kind of just gives black a free game. Now black is almost equalized already, just because now this bishop is fine. Bishop d3, bishop d6, castle, castle. Okay, so again, probably here the right move is to play queen c2. You know, it looks on this diagonal, so this knight's kind of stuck. You're eventually potentially eyeing e4 at some point, but also it kind of helps support your minority attack by attacking c6. Okay, rook b1, a5. So a5 is kind of unnecessary. You're not really too worried about b4. Probably just rook e8 instead, and then play like knight e4 and get your own attack going with like f5 and f4. But he played a5, rook e1, rook e8. Okay, so here again, probably something like queen c2, knight f8, h3, stop pieces going to g4, bishop e6, and now just b3. That's about even. You're going to maybe play like knight a4 to knight c5. Try to weaken this pawn chain a little bit. Also have ideas of maybe bishop to d2. Yeah, it's just the position. He played e4 instead though. And now after d takes, knight takes, bishop takes, knight f6. This is actually good for black. This pawn is isolated, and white's pieces aren't really well positioned to take advantage of that. Black's pieces kind of have free reign, so this is probably slightly better for black already. Bishop g5. And now black should have actually kind of gained a tempo by playing bishop e6. So the point of bishop e6 is that these rooks are connected. And you're attacking this. So after a3, now you play h6. Now you play h6. And the reason for why this is important will become clear in a second. So after h6 instead, bishop takes f6, queen takes f6, and now white play bishop h7 check.
Check.
So notice if this bishop were on e6, this move wouldn't have even been possible. I could have just taken, because this rook wouldn't have been hanging. So that's why inserting bishop e6 was important. But now after king f8, it's kind of tricky. So rook takes e8, queen takes
check.
e8. Okay. So now, the reason why this bishop h7 check was useful is now this king is kind of in the center, where it's more awkward than it would be if it were on g8. Okay, but now the thing is this bishop has done its job, so it needs to return home. So this bishop needs to just go back home. Bishop c2. Then bishop g4, queen e1 check, getting out of the pin with check, king f8, and knight e5. And it's just about equal. But the bishop really needs to get out of there. So queen d2, trying to like, say if g6 he's going to take on h6 or something. Okay, bishop e6. Okay, again, bishop c2 is best. Bishop a2, rook e1, check. King f8, queen d3, threatening this stuff. Bishop e6, queen h7, g5, and knight e5. And again, white has some pressure. Down a pawn, but it's kind of tough for black to untangle. So this would have been better than a3, because now bishop f4, queen c3, g6, and now all of a sudden this bishop is not looking too happy. Not looking too happy. So rook e1, king f8, get out of pins and stuff, and just get ready to play this. g3, attacking the bishop, bishop d6. Okay. So now the question is, well, we know we're going to lose some material because this bishop is super doomed. But the question is how to best extricate it. How to best extricate it. And so white played bishop takes g6, which was slightly inexact. Probably the better way to do it is actually play rook takes e6. So the point is that if black plays the natural queen takes e6, thinking, okay, well, this bishop is still trapped, well, this is actually a mistake because white has a strong d5 double attack, attacking both h8 and attacking the queen. So queen e8 would basically be forced in order to meet queen h8 with king e7 and to block the attack. And then d takes c6. If b takes c6, bishop takes g6, f takes g6, queen f6, check, king g, and queen takes d6. And this is actually tricky because this king is unsafe and I have an exchange, or I have a knight and a pawn for the rook, and this rook is very passive. So that would be a tricky way to play. So instead of taking on c6, you probably should play rook c8, pin, with the idea of rook takes c6. And then again, bishop takes, f takes, queen f6,
check,
king g8, queen d6, and queen c6. And okay, this is probably good for black, but okay, at least white still has some chances. Because again, the king is kind of open, and you have a knight and a pawn for the exchange. But now black's pieces are more coordinated than the previous variation. So queen takes e6 is actually a mistake, relatively. So the correct move would actually be to play f takes e6. But now the bishop can get out, because knight h4. Queen g7, queen f3 check, queen f7, bishop takes g6. Queen takes f3, knight takes f3. And again, you have a pawn for the exchange. Problem is this pawn is kind of weak, and it's probably going to be lost after bishop b6 and rook d8. But, you know, these pawns aren't too great, and if you can somehow mobilize these guys real quick, maybe you have a chance. But again, you're only down the exchange, you're not down a piece, which is what happened after bishop takes g6. So bishop takes g6 was played, f takes g6, and now it's just kind of down a piece. Queen e3, queen f7, knight e5, take, sorry, king f7. Knight e5,
check,
take, queen g5 is offering a queen trade, declining, defending the pawn, going back, getting safe, h4, b5, queen c3, bishop d5, e6,
check,
f6, and here black wins by resign. Because, I mean, he's just down a piece, and rook e8 is coming, rook takes e6 is coming, and if you don't queen trade, queen f3 is coming with mate. So, yeah, white could have made things a little bit more complicated, but he kind of gave black a free game in the opening by playing, by taking on d5 early, and then by playing a quick e4, which kind of just isolated his own pawn and gave black's pieces good scope. So that was how black got an easy game. So Big Daddy Llama at this point, I think, was 3-0. So now let's look at his fourth game. So this is Big Daddy Llama against Railbird. So this is his next title defense. So this game was actually really interesting. So let's go back to the start. d4, d5, c4, e6, knight f3, knight f6. Okay, so it's just a queen's gambit. Bishop g5, bishop e7, e3. Okay. So Railbird here played a6, which is really kind of inexact. It's a line, but it's not favored. The most common moves here are either h6 or just castle. Okay, so yeah, a6, c5 was actually a good response to this. c6, bishop d3. And if you guys remember, this type of pawn structure was actually in Railbird's game where he was white against GPAC in that French exchange where he played a quick c5. And remember what I was saying, that GPAC should play a quick b6 to kind of counteract it. And similarly here, Railbird should have played b6. b6, b4, a5, a3, castle. Castle, and if you remember, what was the big move that was important in GPAC's game was bishop a6, trading off this bad bishop. And again, here, bishop a6 is called for. And this is probably okay for black. Okay, so instead, play h6, bishop f4. And again, here, b6 is probably to be recommended. If c takes b6, just queen takes b6. And you have pressure on b2, and you're going to play c5 quickly, so this is fine. And if b4 again, then a5, a3, castle, and queen b1. Okay, so now here you can't actually play bishop a6. So you have to be careful. There's a little tactic here. Bishop a6 doesn't work here because of bishop takes a6, rook takes a6, b5, cb5, and c6. And all of a sudden this knight's actually trapped. This knight's actually trapped. So if knight b8, then c7. Uh-oh. So you have to play queen c8, but just queen takes b5 now. And this is bad news. Because, okay, I mean, I can't take yet because the queen takes c3, but I'm going to play rook c1, and this knight's going to be stuck on b8, and I can play knight a4, and knight takes b6, and it's just really bad. So you have to be careful about that type of tactic. But what black should do is he still really wants to play bishop a6. He just can't do it yet. So what he should do actually is just play bishop b7. And the idea of this move is actually simply to play queen to c8 and bishop to a6. Because it's most important in this position for black to kind of trade these bishops if possible. And so black needs to prepare this with queen c8, bishop a6. So that's what black should do. Okay, but instead you play knight h5. So bishop e5. And now I'm not so sure he should be so ready to take on e5. Maybe just castle first. Because I mean, okay, even though technically his bishop, you know, is annoying, like it's like white's bad bishop. So he shouldn't be really in such a hurry to try to get it off the board. But okay, he took, knight f6. Okay. And now here's the point of the game where Llama could have played a little bit more accurately. Because I think he realized during the game that, you know, eventually black was going to play something like knight to d7 and try to kick his knight out of e5. And he realized that f4 was, you know, an interesting way to keep the knight. So he should have probably kept his options for f4 open by playing castling. And then after knight d7 to play f4. And now you have the typical thematic ideas of, you know, trying to get a kingside attack going with queen h5 and rook f3 and rook g3. Because this knight's kind of a powerhouse, and these bishops are feel very cramped in this position. But what instead he played is he played b4, which is a little suspect because, I mean, he should actually probably be playing on the king side rather than on the queen side, even though his pawns do point this way. Black's pieces are kind of shut out from the king side by his pawn structure. So after b4, the problem is after knight d7, f4 is not as good because the queen's up after a5, a3, knight takes e5. Okay, now if you take with this pawn, all of a sudden maybe d4 is annoying. So you gotta take with the other pawn. And now bishop g5, queen f3, ab4. So you can't take back because of the rook hangs, so you can castle though. And now this doesn't work as a mate. So castle, ab4, rook a1, rook a1, f6. And this is probably just equal. This is probably just equal. Because black is going to chip away at this pawn center, and there's really no great targets that white has. This pawn is too far in the base of the pawn chain. So the problem with b4 is that it kind of allows this queenside open opening of the position and makes f4 not as appetizing. So he actually played the correct move after knight d7, which is actually to take on d7. So this is correct. Bishop takes d7, knight a4. So just heading for b6, castle, knight b6, rook b8. So this is all fine. Bishop b8 trying to get this bishop out this way. a4, queen c7, queen b3. Okay. So here he probably should just play something like b5. ab5, ab5, cb5, queen b3. This makes more sense. And if black doesn't take the second time, well then you're going to play moves like rook a7 and take anyway. And then just kind of try to triple on the a file, or double on the a file at the very least. But this is very thematic, just trying to open up the a file for your rook, because this knight controls a8, so black can never really recontest the file. But okay, play queen b3 first. He's trying to kind of prepare it some more. e5. Okay, so again now black is doing something smart. He's trying to make the pawn chain a bit weaker. So he's starting to kind of take here and make the new target of the pawn chain d4. So you definitely don't want to allow that. And so pawn takes pawn is probably correct, followed by e4. Followed by e4. So of course if take, just rook e1 and all these pieces in the e file will be a problem. So he probably should instead play bishop d8, try to get this bishop here or here. Then e takes d5, bishop takes b6, c takes b6, c takes d5, and a5. And really only white can be better here, because this is an isolated pawn. This pawn on b6 is very strong. White has ideas just to play rook c1, rook c7, rook e1, rook e7. So white should be slightly better here. Also, white has the idea to play b5 and just try to get a promoted pawn here. But yeah, he should take on e5. Because after b5, well, now bishop f6 is good. Bishop c2, and the point of bishop c2 is that after take, black can't take on d4 because queen d3 is a double attack, attacking d4 and threatening mate. So it kind of indirectly defends this pawn. And then it gets ready to move a rook to d1, rook f d1 or something to defend it. Okay, but instead he took on b5, took on b5, okay, took on d4, took on d4. Queen f4 hitting a pawn. So white should just defend it with rook f d1. So indirectly defends it, of course. If queen takes d4, bishop h7 check. Wins the queen. So he can't take the pawn. And if bishop f6, well, g3. Again, the pawn is taboo, bishop h7. So queen g4, and then just queen c2. And bishop takes d4 is not working due to rook a4. Pin. So it kind of gets white's pieces on better squares. But instead he took on c6. And actually, black could capture either way. Bishop takes or pawn takes. They both have their merits. He took with a pawn. Rook a4. Okay. So now in this position, black had to make use of the opportunity provided by the fact that this knight is pinned in order to redeploy this bishop. So he only really had one chance here. And so his one chance was to play bishop d7 immediately. So he can't take, obviously, the knight's pinned. So g3, queen c7, bishop c2, bishop g4. And this is probably close to equal. This is the weak point of the pawn chain for black. This is the weak point of the pawn chain for white. They're about equally difficult to attack. Black has two bishops, but this knight is kind of controlling a lot of key squares. So this is probably just about even. Okay, instead, after bc6, rook a4, he played bishop f6. So now the bishop is still stuck on e8. And so queen c3. Now the bishop can't go to d7 anymore. bishop d8. So this queen probably needs to resituate itself. So queen c7 with the idea of queen a5, bishop g5. And again, we're trying to stop f4. And this is, again, probably about equal. Because with the queen on c7, we want to try to go bishop d7 and get a bishop out. But instead, he played bishop d8. Okay, so g3 hitting the queen. And now rook a6 to defend the knight is probably better than what white played, which is rook to b1. Because this rook probably needs to keep active on either the e file or the d file, depending. D file to help support this pawn, or e file to kind of look at that open file. Because this rook isn't really doing much now. So rook a6 is kind of a better use of that rook. Okay, but rook b1. So now actually black can take here. And if rook takes, just bishop d7, rook a7, bishop h3, this is, again, about equal. And if he takes with the pawn, well then c5. And this queen comes around. And this pawn is pinned, don't forget. So c5, rook a6, c4, bishop f1, bishop d7. Again, about equal. Because this pawn isn't going anywhere. And black can stack up if he needs to. So by rook b1, he allows this possibility. Whereas if the rook were on a6, this wouldn't be possible. Because okay, if rook a6, take. Well, now on c5, I could just take with this, and if bishop d7, well, now I have like queen c5, and now I'm getting my rooks in. So anyway, bishop f6, queen c3, bishop d8, so you play rook b1, queen g5, rook a7, queen g4, f3, queen g5. Oh, sorry, he played g3 at some point. 25 g3. Sorry, he played g3 first. And then he played rook b1. Alright, so again, rook a6 there is stronger. Queen g5, rook a7, queen g4. Okay, f3. So obviously he can't take because of bishop h7. So queen g5, king g2. Okay. So white's still doing quite well here, but he has to realize that black has this idea of counterplay. And this idea of counterplay is that he wants to play g5 and just make these pawns weak. Because, you know, now these pawns are a bit advanced, they're significantly weaker than they were originally. So, you know, advancing these pawns wasn't bad because it made the queen less active. But you have to kind of realize that this counterplay is occurring. So what white has to do here is do something like bishop f5. So the point of bishop f5 is to kind of hold on to this diagonal. And then after g5, hg5, queen g5, queen d3, h4, f4, queen g3,
Check.
queen g3,
Check.
hg3, and rook a3. And this is actually really good for white. Oops. Rook g3.
Check.
Because after king f6, you can just play knight takes d5.
Check.
C takes d5 and rook takes b8. Wins the exchange. So bishop f5 would have been a good move. But he actually plays a very bad move here, which is rook a8. Because now it's all actually equal. Or actually black's actually better. After rook takes a8, knight takes a8, g5. Because now all of a sudden h4 is hanging and you're not really as ready to meet it as you were. So h takes g5. Queen takes g5 would have been better. Just threatening h4, so queen c1 is probably best here. Queen g7 with the idea that after queen f4, bishop d7. This knight's kind of stuck, and you just want to play rook e8, and h4 even, and even bishop g5. But he took with the bishop instead. And here, f4 is almost necessary. After which point black can actually take, although it's probably nothing more than a slight advantage for white. After take, queen e1. Gotta stop these shenanigans. Queen takes d4, queen d2, and queen g7.
Check.
The idea of bishop to d7 and bishop to g4. So it seems like you should check on g4 here, but you actually want to put your bishop on g4 to block the g file. So queen g7 and then bishop g7, bishop g4. And white's almost slightly better. And if you don't take on f4, well then actually white's going to be much better because this h-pawn is going to be lost. And now black has no more play. But instead he plays knight to c7, which is another big mistake. Bishop d7, because now this rook gets out. Queen e1, bishop f6, queen f2. And now something like h4 is actually almost winning by force. So first let's look at rook h1. So rook h1 seems like the most natural move. Well, rook h1, h3,
check.
king h2, and now the cute bishop takes d4, deflecting the queen. If queen takes d4, queen d2 is
check.
Mate. King g1 and queen g2 mate.
Check.
Oops, queen g2 mate.
Checkmate.
So that's pretty much over. So you can't really go rook h1 because you can't really take away that square. So rook d1 seems like a better try. But now king h8, just getting ready to do this. Queen d2, offering a queen trade. No. Queen c2, and now black to move and win. Do you guys see it? It's very pretty. But sacrifice bishop h3 works
check.
Very, very pleasantly. So of course if you don't take, I'm just going to take here, check, and win c7. The g-pack fork. So you got to take on h3. But now check. Okay, if you take this again, you're losing all your pieces. Bishop f4,
check.
queen h2,
check.
etc. So you got to play king g2. Check.
Check.
Oops. Check.
Check. Check.
Check.
Check.
Okay, now if you go here, it's mate.
Checkmate.
So you gotta go here. Check.
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 And rook b8 just wins. Can't stop rook b1. Pretty much have to just sacrifice all your pieces to stop mate. So that would have been a nice finish. But instead of h4, rook b4, or sorry, he played queen g7 instead. And after rook b4, again, h4 is very strong, similar ideas. But he played rook c8. They're both kind of very short on time. So after rook c8, knight a6, rook a8. And here, now this rook is kind of passive because it's blocked by this knight. So white should try to keep this rook out of the game and just play a move like queen e3. Just play a move like queen e3. And after h4, the idea is just play queen f4. And okay, black's better, but not significantly. Because now we have some defenses constructed. Maybe we can, force a trade of rooks or something. At some point. We have to be careful about this pawn, but, queen trade is not the end of the world anymore. But instead he played knight c7 again. Or sorry. What happened? Oh yeah, so he played knight c7 again. Rook c8, knight a6. And again, h4 is good. It's a repeat of what we saw a few moves ago. Bishop d8, knight b8, bishop b8. Okay, and now there's a question of which to play, bishop a6 or bishop f5. And the way to play is to play bishop f5. The point is that on f5, we give our knight this retreating square, whereas on bishop a6, the knight's actually stuck. So Lama played bishop a6, but now the knight's stuck. So if bishop f5, it's actually probably equal after rook c7, rook b2, defending second rank, rook e7, rook e2, queen g5, rook e7, queen e7, and queen d2. It's probably just equal, because now the knight can get out if it needs to. But after bishop a6, rook c7, now queen e3, rook e7, Queen f4, and now queen g6 is very strong, threatening queen c2 check. So rook b2, but now bishop c7 fork. Queen h4, f6 defending the rook. Bishop f1, trying to give the knight a flight square. Rook g7, threatening g3. f4, queen e4 check. King h2, rook g4. Queen takes f6, and queen e3, threatening queen takes g3. So rook g2 forced, but now, finally, the rook had to abandon the knight. So bishop takes knight wins the piece, after all that. So yeah, the problem was this bishop c7 is coming, and the knight is stuck. So he played bishop c7 right away, though, which looks good. But now it's not as strong, because queen h4 comes with tempo. King f8 would be best here. And then after rook b2, queen h6. Similar idea of just trying to deflect the rook to play queen d2 check. Also, queen c1 is threatened. And this knight again is just stuck because the bishop's on the wrong square. But he played, instead of king f8, he played rook e6 and bishop d3. And here black lost on time, unfortunately, even though he's completely winning. A sample line I'll show you is f5, strong move. The bishop obviously can't take because of rook takes rook e2 check. So he has to play rook b7, rook g6. So the idea of f5 is to give the rook g6, because now the bishop's not attacking it. g4, hg4, f4, you gotta keep it closed somehow. Rook h6, queen g5, take, rook h2,
check.
g1, and bishop f4. And this is very bad for black, or for white. These pawns are too strong. So Lammermoor got kind of lucky. Railbird was in time pressure, but he kind of botched the whole game. So yeah, if Lammermoor had just been a little bit more accurate with his queenside play to begin with, he wouldn't have allowed all this counterplay with h4 and these shenanigans. Okay, so that was that game. The next game to look at is a game between Romeo and little k. So let me set white name Romeo xt, set black name little k Koff.